Is the person in your life that you're maybe having a particularly challenging time with just a dismissive avoidant attachment style, or are they perhaps a narcissist? Because there are some really crucial differences. And while one may be a little bit taxing or challenging from a nervous system point of view, the other can actually cause a lot of trauma, and a lot of trauma in a pretty long-term way. So in today's video, in the next 7 minutes here, I'm gonna break down the 9 major differences between a dismissive avoidant attachment style and a narcissist. We'll even talk a little bit about covert narcissism in this. And my hope is that you can use this to deeply understand and unpack the crucial similarities and differences so you know what to do next. So let's start by defining the differences, or what they each are first, okay? So a covert narcissist, sometimes you'll hear this referred to as a vulnerable narcissist or introverted narcissist, basically exhibits the key traits of a narcissist in a more subtle way than you would see with a grandiose narcissist. So while both share key characteristics, okay, the grandiose or overt narcissist, our classic narcissist that we think of versus our actual covert narcissist, they both share key traits like lacking empathy, struggling with entitlement, having this over-exaggerated or inflated sense of self-importance. Covert narcissists tend to actually display traits and qualities that can be more difficult to detect. Now, I'm going to define what a dismissive avoidant attachment style is for you if you're somebody who's newer to the different attachment styles on this channel, and then we're going to really break down how to spot the crucial differences. So a dismissive avoidant is a type of attachment style which is characterized by needing to emotionally distance themselves or minimize their attachment needs to others. And you can think of this attachment style as being a subconscious set of rules that we learn about love and connection, what our needs are, how we should connect, what we're supposed to expect in a relationship. And generally, this attachment style, in a sense, develops because of a defense mechanism in response to early experiences of neglect or a lack of emotional availability from caregivers. Okay, so if you grew up in a household where, emotions are shamed or put down, then that neglect of that emotional attunement and connection is going to cause you to say, okay, I just need to suppress my own emotions and keep myself emotionally distant from others so that I'm not rejected, so that I'm not neglected again. And I'm just going to really learn how to self-soothe and become hyper independent. Now, believe it or not, a lot of patterns of covert narcissism and dismissive avoidant attachment style get conflated, get confused, and there are some similarities, but there are many more differences. So one of the biggest first red flags I will tend to see is if one version of this person in the outer world is different than in the inner world. That, to me, like when you're seeing somebody who, a covert narcissist, they may be like quite charming, quite charismatic, quite amazing in their outer world with people. Even if that charm is a little bit superficial, even if it's a little bit of like glib is often the term that it's discussed as, this sort of superficial charm. Even if that's there, you'll generally see that in the outer world. Whereas in the inner world, they can actually be very different. And we'll talk in more detail about what those differences are, but they can be harsh, critical, passive aggressive, never accountable for their own behaviors and emotions, struggling to have a lack of insight or to be able to actually self-reflect really. And, externally, you would never really see them as that. So there will be this difference between who they present themselves as in the outer world versus the inner world. Whereas a dismissive avoidant attachment style, when you look into like how they tend to present, their personality tends to be quite congruent. If they're slower to warm up or a little bit standoffish, they'll be that way in their outer world just as much in the inner world, even more so at times. You'll see it in the outer world. They may even warm up and actually be a little bit more kind or sweet or empathetic when you know them on their inner world, when you've gotten to know them further. Okay, so that's one really big piece. Another thing is a covert narcissist, even though they don't have this grandiose sense of self-importance, they do have this inflated sense of self. And so what I mean by this is that this inflated sense of self, they're constantly needing admiration. They're constantly needing to sort of be propped up in terms of the image that people see of them. And so they need to have this, sort of not larger than life personality, because that's very much grandiose narcissist, but they need to have this dynamic where people see them as amazing. That's like, they really need to feel like they're put on a pedestal by somebody else and never questioned. Whereas a dismissive avoidant, they don't need that. Dismissive avoidance, like a true dismissive avoidant, they are not looking to have this like inflated sense of self. If anything, they're kind of just looking to be like left alone. They don't really want to be seen as like special or unique in any kind of way. They just want to like have their own freedom, independence, time to themselves. Sure, like, dismissive avoidant will take nicely to somebody who, appreciates them or acknowledges them. But that is not something they want in excess. In fact, if you give a dismissive avoidant a lot of excess appreciation and acknowledgement, if you're like, wow, you're so amazing, you're the best partner ever, they'll shut down a little bit generally. They won't trust that. They won't like to hear that. They'll sort of end up in a situation where they feel like, oh, why are you putting me on this pedestal? I don't like that. I just want to be able to relate to you person to person. And it can cause them to shut down a little bit. Now, the difference between that, just for the context here, and and just appreciation and acknowledgement would be, they do want to be appreciated. Dismissive avoidance, they want to hear like, oh, hey, thank you for taking out the trash, or hey, thanks for having that hard conversation with me in the relationship, I'm glad we worked through it. Like, they do take well to that, but those are like sincere small discussions. They're real. They're not about their ego feeling like, oh wow, you think I'm amazing. And they're not constantly hungering for that and even prioritizing who they spend their time with the way that you would see with a covert narcissist. A covert narcissist, they will prioritize who they spend time with. What they think of their own relationships will be largely dependent on like, are people feeding my ego, basically. Even if it's quiet, it's there. And when you look at a covert narcissist and the need to have their ego fed all the time, you'll see that they need to feel like people think highly of them. They need to feel like, people aren't questioning them, that people are supporting the kind of version of themselves that they see themselves as. And they'll superimpose that onto you. They'll be like, this is, you have to see me as greater than everybody else in a sense, or special and unique in a sense, even if it's not like this grandiose hunger that you would see with a typical narcissist or like classic narcissist. They still need to feel like people are like, they see their specialness, their uniqueness, how powerful they are. They need to feel like people see how important they are. And again, that's just not something you're going to see in a dismissive avoidant. Our next one here is, you'll see this sense of arrogance where with a covert narcissist that's there, it's in the background, especially behind closed doors, there will be this like arrogant kind of attitude a lot of the time. Whereas with a dismissive avoidant, you may see that they're standoffish at first, like they're slower to warm up, they're a little slower to let people in. But I really want to like make clear the difference between somebody who's arrogant versus somebody who's a little bit guarded. Like those are two very different things. Arrogance will come with this condescending behavior, the putting down, I had somebody say to me once who was for sure in a marriage with a covert narcissist back when I was running my practice. And she said, it feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like it feels like there's this constant condescension, this constant resentment, these small little jabs all the time that are just like wearing and wearing on me. And, as we were starting to do discovery work together and learn about her and her relationship, it was like, wow, that started to be one of the obvious things that pointed in the direction of covert narcissism. Dismissive avoidance, they can hurt people, right? Just like any insecure attachment style can hurt people. But a lot of dismissive avoidance, their hurt comes from like inaction. So a lack of action, right? So not making as much of an effort behaviorally, or a lack of like concerted effort towards investing in a relationship consistently enough. And again, a narcissist, they are actually taking action that causes harm. Like they'll actually be condescending, say mean things. And a lot of these mean things will be these backhanded sort of compliments or comments where you're not even sure. Like they may say, oh yeah, that dress looks so much better on you than the dress you wore yesterday. Thank goodness you're wearing this one. And you're like, whoa, are you giving me a compliment because you said this dress looks nicer? Or are you putting me down for how awful you think I looked yesterday? Like just little things like that where you can't really tell what's really going on. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. Another big thing is you will see, and this is where things can be conflated, right? You will see this sense of entitlement with a covert narcissist, and you'll see that sense of entitlement really be like, I am entitled to more because I am better than everybody else, even if other people don't realize it. Like, people don't even realize how great I am or how great I'm going to become. Like, that's like that entitlement piece. Whereas with a dismissive avoidant, sometimes they can be a little bit more selfish, right? So there can be this, again, I want to like really splice up some of these differences here. Entitlement would be like, I am deserving of your time and resources because I am better than you. Like there's this, that's more of our entitlement. Selfishness, if somebody had to grow up in a household where it was modeled to them, where like everybody's out for themselves, everybody has to take care of their own business. Sometimes what you will see where I think this gets really conflated is somebody who puts their needs first, but they're not trying to take resources or exploit other people. If somebody gives something to them, they may receive it, but they're not like, oh, I deserve your stuff, your energy, your time. They're more like, I'm focused on my own energy, my time, and really being careful with that and putting that as a priority, right? So there could be a lack of like reciprocity sometimes, definitely a lack of covert contracts, definitely a lack of like, oh, because you gave something to me, I'm now going to invest in you back. It's more like they'll decide whether they want to invest in somebody back and how they feel. And so there can be this self-orientation there, but entitlement is really like, I am going to take your reason, like I deserve your time. You should be treating me. You should be putting me as the biggest priority. And that's really, I think, an important differentiator here when it comes to these two topics. Now, I still have two other points here that I want to make. Sometimes with a covert narcissist, I say sometimes, but let's say often with a covert narcissist, a lot of times their version of obtaining supply or attention is through their victimhood. Okay. So a lot of times what you'll see is that they may say, I had the hardest childhood. My childhood was way harder than everybody else's. And so now, almost like they're owed, right? Almost like now the world owes them, everybody owes them. And everybody should be, bending over backwards in a sense to do everything for them because they have it worse than everybody else. And so sometimes they'll get that need for attention met through their victimhood, right? Which can be a really, really big piece. And with a dismissive avoidant, you're just not going to see a lot of victimhood behavior. It's not really going to be there because they're not really going to open up enough to even present that, even if they are feeling that way. So I think that's another important distinction and differentiator. And again, like, for sure, like there could be in both cases, difficulty in childhood, right? It doesn't mean like this is smooth sailing, but you'll see that unfortunately the covert narcissist tends to leverage a painful story or event, especially from the past, as a way of like manipulating people to do things for them, to give them their time or energy or whatever it might be. And so again, that really lands in that more covert territory. And then another huge thing, and I think this is such an important thing to make a distinction of in a relationship, is if there's an argument or disagreement, a covert narcissist is going to be somebody who does not admit fault, basically at any cost. I've worked with covert narcissists before, like usually it would be in the context of having there's a marriage and they're on the rocks and when the spouse comes in first and works with me, and then they're like, can I bring in my spouse? And then, by the first or second session, I'm like, oh, wow, this person's a covert narcissist. Their spouse is a covert narcissist. And I'll give you an example of the patterns I would see. I would see things like, even if the person clearly did something, okay, I'll tell a specific story actually. So I had a couple, I would see this fairly frequently. And that couple, one of the partners, so in this case, it was the husband, they would start doing this thing, and you would actually see this all the time in quite unhealthy relationships or people that were really struggling, where one partner would start recording the other partner during an argument. And in this particular case, the wife recorded the husband like really yelling and saying mean things. And so she brought this into the session, and she was like, here's an example. Like he pretends like he always is, so kind and so forgiving, but listen, he said this thing. So even in the case, and he was raising his voice and saying like, he was calling her names, like names that were rude, right? So like unhealthy behavior. And even when caught red-handed, like rather than him saying, you're right, I messed up, I shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry, I do take that back. Like rather than being able to self-reflect, admit fault, be accountable, have like a depth of understanding of perspective. Instead, there was no empathy. So there was no empathy for like how he treated her, even in that like moment. And instead, he proceeded to be like, well, I only did that because she first did these things. And I would never have had to do that if I wasn't trying to teach her an important lesson through mirroring this behavior back to her. And so there was still this like holier than thou, like greater than the other person. Like I'm just, the only reason I had that behavior was to teach this person a lesson. And, that was why this took place. And again, the deflecting back to like, she did these things first. And so it was completely glazed over. There was no like, hey, I actually can see that would be hurtful. I was really upset in that moment and I wish I didn't do that. I'm really sorry. Like nothing like that. Instead, it was like, it was for a good reason. It was justified. It was for her own well-being, to show her this lesson, to teach her this thing. And it was also because of her behaviors prior to that. And it's like, again, this lacking of empathy, this arrogance in a way, this condescension, this no ability to be accountable or resource their own perspective, their own insights. And so again, you have this like, I am better, I'm just better than everybody else. And I will try to showcase this to you in various forms. Now, you will see other things with a covert narcissist that would mirror back with like a typical narcissist, a grandiose narcissist, where there can be like preoccupation with like fantasies of success or power or beauty or ideal love or things like that. And definitely like an envy preoccupation can be there. Like believe that other people are envious of them or they're envious of others, or, this kind of preoccupation that you'll see more traditionally with narcissists that won't show up all the time overtly, but absolutely can. But I think those are some of the main differences. And again, you won't see like dismissive avoidants don't care generally about like the status of other people. Like they're not like, oh, I can only hang out with high status or high power friends. And they definitely don't tend to have a preoccupation with empathy. So those are some really important things to recognize in terms of key similarities and differences. And I'm hoping this makes a whole lot of sense and gives you, if you're in a relationship, the ability to really differentiate these two so that you can take strides forward to be really clear on what happens next. And to be honest, I would say don't be in a relationship with a covert narcissist under any pretenses. Like I would automatically say to leave, because unfortunately, even though they're wounded, they're just not healthy and ready for a safe relationship or to not spread trauma. And as I say with all attachment style relationships, look to make sure that the person's willing to do the work. A lot of dismissive avoidants will self-reflect, will have the ability to recognize their own patterns, will take strides forward. If you're not seeing that with any attachment style, then it's like, hey, you probably shouldn't be in a relationship if you're not happy and it's not going to change, right? Because the other person's not willing to be, making moves towards their own growth. But with a narcissist, you'll just probably never really see much of that anyway. So that, hopefully gives you some really great insight. If you want more about this topic, let me know your experiences in the comments below. Let me know if you want to see more content like this. And if you're enjoying this channel, please subscribe so you don't miss any of our daily videos. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video as well.